Tonight we have for you Emma Sage, Science Manager at the SCAA, who's going to be talking to you about flavour, physiology, perception and multisensory interactions. Simon Gane, ENT surgeon, olfaction researcher, will be talking about the anatomy and physiology of olfaction, which is smell. We have various props for you through the night, through the evening. Can you put your hand up if you do not have all of these things? A cup of weird green juice.
Black cup. Black
paper cup.
With a lid.
A cup of sweets, basically, celebrations.
That's the liquid.
A cup with a little paper strip in it. If you do not have it.
If there's no chocolate on it, you have Reese's Pieces in yours. So it's just the chocolate.
Any peanut allergies here? No. Okay, good. A notepad and a feedback form. Now the feedback form is from me. I made these up, and I made them up very quickly, so it may not have covered all the possibilities. There is an other section to put in things that I forgot. So if there's something you would like to see here as a talk, we can organise it for you, Tim and I, but we need to know what it is. So what we're going to do is add everything up as a ranking from 1 to 3. So please put 3 as your most desired, 2 as your next most desired, and 1 as your least desired of the 3. Does that make sense? So go in reverse order. Don't make your most favourite number 1, make it 3, because we'll add it all up and see which scores the best. In terms of timings, Emma's going to talk first for about 40 minutes, something like that. Then there's a quick break, Simon's going to talk, and then there's a Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, save them for the end. And then if you are going to caffeine, did everyone who's going to caffeine get a little token, a ticket? Good. Okay. Yeah, good to start, Emma.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, thanks Ben, thanks everyone. For those of you who don't know me, like Ben said, I am the science manager. What is that? Well, originally my academic background is in plant physiology, which is quite different from what I'm talking about tonight. But I made my way to the coffee industry where I became a coffee generalist, if you will. Pretty much everything from genetics and agronomy all the way up to sensory science and perception of coffee. And everything you can relate biology, chemistry, and physics to, among more specific scientific disciplines. So at the SCAA, I work as a science educator and also a liaison between science and industry. And that is what I do for our membership. And recently, last year, I completed a sensory science and consumer science certificate program at UC Davis in California. And that has helped me to understand this sensory world a lot better. So for us as human beings, to sense something, there first has to be a stimulus, and then we perceive it, there's a sensation, and we detect it, and then it translates, somehow there's a signal in our body that elicits a response. So it's the senses, but also the brain. And I know taste was in the title of my talk, and in a very simple sense, we're going to be dealing a lot with taste tonight, but in fact, I'm talking about flavor, because you can't really separate taste from flavor if you put something in your mouth and sense it that way. So, also the psychology, we'll get into a little bit later, has to do with your overall perception, which actually is all of your senses, and your brain, and your memory, and your expectations. So, every time you eat something or drink something, it's going to be not just the taste, it's going to be the flavor experience. So just to get a little technical with some of these definitions, for taste itself, when we talk about taste, we're only talking about the response to basically a chemical stimuli that is perceived in the oral cavity around your mouth. And taste can be divided into gustation and chemical sensitivity. We'll get to that too. And gustation is the chemical sense that is perceived by the taste buds. So this is a different kind of bud anatomy. I'm a plant scientist, so this is the other bud. And taste buds are basically a bunch of cells in your tongue. Each taste bud is made up of a lot of different cells, but there are a few different kinds. In your tongue, on your tongue itself, on the surface, it might be about 9,000 taste buds, but also in your mouth, not only on your tongue, but also sort of in the back of your throat, there are other taste buds that are around. There are a few different kinds of taste buds. The circumvallate polypi are found generally towards the back of the tongue and in a bit of a V. All the diagrams are kind of simplistic as far as where these taste buds are found. Really, they're probably all found around the tongue, but they have concentrations in different areas. And these polypi are these formations, and you can see the structure where those little white dots are representing many different taste buds. So it's not just one taste bud there. It's a structure on your tongue that has a lot of different taste buds on it. And then the foliate papillae are the grooves located sort of towards the sides of the tongue. They're concentrated there, and they have, again, many taste buds inside of them. And these actually contain almost 1/3 of the total number of taste buds on your tongue. And then the fungiform papillae are the ones that are sort of concentrated towards the front, and they're a sort of simple structure with maybe just a few taste buds on them, or maybe even some have none. So physiologically, there are a few different structures on your tongue that contain taste buds. And the taste bud there that you can see is a little pore that will ultimately translate a signal to your brain. So we know about sweet, sour, bitter, umami, etc. There are also some other tastes that are sort of up for debate in the scientific community. Sensory science is what I like to call a young discipline, where compared to, I don't know, astronomy or physics, it's just a baby. Sensory science really started being developed by researchers in the 1900s, and the 1950s and 60s was the real starting point for an academic discipline of sensory science. So lots of things we still don't know about how we perceive things and how our brains interact with our senses and our primary senses versus olfaction. Like, all these things are still not absolutely clear to us. So some scientists believe that the tongue can taste the basic tastes, and also metallic or also fatty could possibly be considered basic tastes by certain people. But for now, they're not officially other basic tastes. There's a lot of research being done to figure this out. Also, there's the chemical sensitivity, which is more of a tactile or irritation that happens in the mouth. And temperature, there's a lot of research now on how temperature can actually kind of trick us to perceiving different taste sensations. Like warmth might make us believe that we're perceiving something as more sweet than it actually is. So chemothesis is the chemical sensation that affects your whole sensory body, essentially. Here we're talking about nose and mouth primarily. And the trigeminal sense is more of the irritant side of things, the taste and smell, chemical irritants in the throat and mouth area, which can be recognized as a flavor. And then finally, astringency is one of these fringe senses also, where the astringency sits kind of between chemical and physical sensation. So most sensory science believe this anyway. So there's a few different things other than the basic tastes that you can perceive in your mouth. the trigeminal nerve is responsible for this trigeminal sense that I mentioned. And it's a part of the chemoreceptive pathway. It receives and transmits information about things like heat, pain, or pressure in your mouth. And all these examples, like hot pepper or cinnamon mustard, like spice irritation, or horseradish, those are good examples of this trigeminal sense. So that's sort of information about the basic taste sensation. There are lots of things that affect this in the human body, right? The human body is not perfect, and it varies among individuals, and psychology gets in the way of it. So I'm just going to go over a few things that affect our taste and affect the way that we perceive things. And one is adaptation. Adaptation is very straightforward. What it means is when you first taste something, when you're first perceiving any sensation, not just flavor even, it seems strong. And then as you continue to, if it's eat the food or drink the coffee or whatever it is, you perceive it as less intense because you're sort of getting used to it, right? Adaptation. And this is something when researchers and sensory scientists are doing work on products or they're looking at some more academic question, they have to take this into consideration. So the stimulus duration, or the flavor duration, and the concentration of the original flavor will affect this adaptation response. And like I said, it doesn't only exist in flavor. There's light adaptation, olfactory adaptation, temperature adaptation, sound or noise adaptation. This all makes sense. And one thing that we know as coffee people is that when we taste something, when we perceive a flavor, it's not just one flavor, right? Coffee is a mixture of hundreds, if not thousands, of chemical compounds. And lucky for us, we get to drink it and analyze it all day long. But that makes the product very complicated. And a mixture effect is just that. It's when the basic tastes kind of interact with each other and interfere or change our perception. So an example is bitterness and sweetness. So quinine and sucrose in this example. If you taste both at once, the same mixture at the same bitterness will taste sweeter if you are adapted to the sucrose. So there's a bit of what they call a rebound effect in this example, or release from suppression, where together the ingredients kind of the two, the bitterness and the sweetness, kind of dull the whole experience. But if one is released, then you can taste the other one. So I feel like as coffee people, we're used to this, but we don't often do an exercise where you remove some of the taste or some of the flavor of coffee. It doesn't work that way. So this is something to try if you're interested. Also about people is that as they age, they don't perceive flavor in the same way. Children, we all pretty much have the number of taste buds we're going to have when we're born, but children are the most sensitive because as we age, we sort of lose them, and we don't make new taste buds as fast anymore. So I read that after the age of 40, this is where it really starts to be noticeable, and the taste buds renew at a slower rate. And then this is why you hear a lot of more elderly people complaining about how they don't enjoy food as much as they once did. This is because of the taste buds. They have fewer taste buds than they did in the past. So, the tongue, I think you all probably have heard that the tongue map is dead. The tongue, these are some pictures sort of impressions of the tongue, and those dots on the right, those are actually the different sort of structures that I described before in the physiology of the tongue that contain the taste buds. So those taste buds, like I said, can be concentrated in different areas, but they're all around. And we know now that this study, for example, from 2006, was one of the main ones that came out to prove that all those taste buds are capable of perceiving all the basic tastes. So, one interesting thing, or an amazing thing about humans, is that we're not perfect instruments because we are at the mercy of our own genetics, right? We are born with a certain number of taste buds, and we are born into a certain culture in a certain part of the world where we eat and drink certain things, and all of this informs our perception as we grow up and are familiar with certain flavors and others not. So people are variable instruments. That's okay. It makes our job exciting, certainly. Bitterness is one of the primary tastes that is most frequently used as the example of this. Is people have a lot of genetic variability in how they perceive bitterness. And I read that there are over 20 bitter receptors that are known. So different types of bitter compounds that can be perceived through receptors in the tongue. So, what about super tasters? Well, apparently super tasters may or may not have more taste buds than other people, but super tasters, whatever that means, are about 25% of the population. So that sounds pretty normal to me. Not that super. So that being said, there is variation, right? There's variation in bitterness perception, but there's variation in everything that we perceive. One of the common, fun experiments that we can do ourselves to understand bitterness and how the perception of bitterness varies among people is to taste this phenolethyl carbonide, the PTC test. And it's a natural compound that is found in plants, and it's a bitter compound. In high doses, it's toxic, and like a lot of chemicals that come from plants that are bitter, it was once meant to deter things that would interfere with the plant, like insects or animals or something. And there is a genetic component to whether or not humans can perceive this PTC, but scientists used to think that it was yes or no, on or off, but in fact it's not like that. As we learn more about human genetics and as we learn more about sensory perception, we're learning that actually there are many different genes involved, not just one gene, and people are able to sense this compound, this PTC, in a gradient. So some people won't taste it at all, some people will taste it a little bit, and some people will taste it very strongly, and everything in between. And there are, like I said, if there are more than 20 different bitterness receptors that are sensed through our taste buds, this is sort of an example of one of them. So, you all have a little piece of paper in one of your candy cups. And I challenge you to place it on your tongue and hold it in your mouth. And see what happens. And whenever you want to take it out of your mouth, you're good. You can take it out of your mouth, don't worry. You don't have to eat it. On the strip is a very low dose of PTC. So, people used to think that this test was for super tasters. It's not. You already know that I think super tasters, it's not really that super. So, with full knowledge that this is sort of one perception of maybe over 20 different types of bitterness that you can perceive as a taster. Who tasted it and it wasn't that bad? Hands raised. Okay. Who tasted it and it was really gross? Okay. And who wasn't really sure that they tasted it? Or maybe just like a little. Yeah. See, we have like a few of everything. Usually, we'll get, in the general population, you would expect about 30% of the audience to pretty much not be able to taste it. That's just the way that the genetics break out. So, and everyone else has a gradient. For me, I don't know. It's pretty gross, but like apparently some people have a really, really strong reaction to it. So, so usually you're somewhere in the middle. And this is just an example of one compound in a sea of compounds that can be perceived as bitterness. Right. Ultimately, bitterness is about biology. I like this story because it has to do with evolution. There's a lot of really cool research going on now about how taste, and your primary taste specifically, might really have evolved with humans because of really basic human needs. Sweets and fats have been associated with energy, carbohydrates, sugar. There's even some research that just came out recently that suggested that this is why kids love sugar so much. I don't know about that, but it's a real thing. It's like there's these theories, and bitterness that we already talked about. Bitterness exists in a lot of toxic plants and foods, and there is a theory that this bitterness, if it doesn't come from plants, bitterness can be produced by harmful bacteria, and this is a way that humans have evolved so that they don't want to eat something that's bad for them. So this makes a lot of sense to me. This is the study that came out pretty, I guess a little while ago, but this was the study that was saying that children have this craving for sweets in a much different way than adults do. I started to research this theory. So I think this is really cool. Okay, I'm going to transfer now and talk about something a little bit different, which is quantifying taste, which is really about sensory science. I already said it was a young discipline, but its whole purpose is to evoke a sense, measure it, and then analyze and interpret it. And the analyze and interpret part of this is the real challenge because we are humans, right? Humans who are not perfect instruments, humans that don't always we don't have repeatable results all the time. But sensory science deals with not just taste, but all of the other senses that make up your sensory experience. Depending on what your question is, different methods in sensory science use different groups, testing groups, experts, like trained experts, consumers, or trained panels. And experts, you might think, are some of us sitting in this room, right? We're coffee experts. But we don't have a lot of sensory science training. And we're certainly not a trained panel. Experts, if you do research in sensory science, you still need a lot of people involved to be your study population. Consumers, though, consumers are sort of the worst in their variability, right? We all know that consumers don't know what they want, so they have a harder time measuring something and responding to something in a consistent way. So when you're doing consumer research, you need a much bigger study population. And then for a trained panel, I'm going to be talking about more, is a very highly trained, full-time panel of tasters, or who don't just taste something, but they perceive the sensory experience of whatever product they're working on, and they train on that product, but also on many other products over time, and they usually work in a sensory science lab. And those people are like human instruments. And those people, you need far fewer of them to do research with. So one method in sensory science is called quantitative descriptive analysis. And this is what I'm focusing on, and you'll see why in a moment. But this method is a quantification of descriptive attributes. So attributes, meaning flavors, are described and then quantified. And they're described in a definition, and they're quantified with references and an intensity scale. So, each flavor attribute in this quantitative descriptive analysis would have a definition, a reference to calibrate on, and then an intensity. So a reference, they might have more than one reference, like a low intensity reference and a high intensity reference. But this work, this quantitative descriptive analysis, is usually done with a trained panel because of that intensity scale. It's very challenging to be calibrated on that intensity scale. So this is a trained panel, and they're shown here evaluating something, but you see it's this rather small group. They're pretty serious. They've got some cups in front of them. Those are some references that they will be testing with whatever product that they're working on. And these panels usually work full-time, and then they go through different projects where they work on different products. They could work on something where they're evaluating carpet texture, right? And they just touch a bunch of different carpets, and then they figure out the words to describe the carpets, and then they describe it, and there are references for the texture. And then there are other products like cat litter. Like maybe they are evaluating the texture of the cat litter, or maybe the aroma of the cat litter. I wouldn't be jealous of that. But then they also evaluate coffee and chocolate and wine and olive oil and all kinds of really fun things. So these trained panels, in order to use descriptive sensory analysis, need to have lexicons. And the lexicons are the basic vocabulary that they use to describe the product. And it needs to be an agreed upon vocabulary so that they can replicate their work like human instruments. And ultimately it's about communication too. Once a lexicon is finished and published, not just one research group will use it, but research groups all over the world will use it so that all of their results are comparable and we can communicate about it. And this type of work is often used in product development and evaluation, like shelf life, ingredient swapping, stuff like that, because it's quantifying not the quality of something and not a score of something, but it's quantifying how much of each separate flavor is involved in a product. So you can imagine if you're a producer of a cake, like a small, like to-go, like breakfast cake that you get at a grocery. And it was a lemon poppy seed cake, right? You might, as a producer of that lemon poppy seed cake, you might have to change your supplier for your lemon concentrate because the price went up. And you want to make sure that when you change your supplier of the lemon concentrate, it's not going to really change the flavor of your lemon cakes, because customers don't like when their lemon cakes change, right? Like, customers don't like change. So as a company, they could do a test with a trained panel using sensory descriptive analysis to find out how much, or if at all, swapping out the lemon concentrate changed the flavor of the lemon poppy seed cake. And literally the panel probably would evaluate more flavors than only lemon, right? They'd probably evaluate lemon, but also some different sweetness attributes, maybe some other sour attributes besides lemon, and they would quantify if the flavor changed or not. You can imagine this example with coffee too, right? Like with a coffee blend. Maybe I should have started there. So there are lexicons for all kinds of different products, like crazy products. These are all kind of nice ones because they're foods, but these lexicons are created for products all over the world, and then they're used by multiple research centers and universities all over the world to do this research. Now, getting back to coffee. Why I brought up this analysis, this sensory descriptive analysis and lexicons, is because we now have one for coffee. It is the World Coffee Research Sensory Lexicon, and you can all get it on the World Coffee Research website. And this was developed at Kansas State University and Texas A&M University in the US. And this is an example of one flavor attribute that's in this lexicon. It's like a little dictionary, right? It's a reference. It's a list of flavors that are found in coffee, like blackberry, with the definition, which is the dark, sweet, floral, slightly sour, somewhat woody, aromatic associated with blackberries. Okay. And a reference product that can be bought at a grocery, a certain brand of blackberry jam. So it also has an intensity reference that's paired with that, which means that the trained panel, who are the human instruments, they evaluated this jam and said, this is a blackberry flavor 5.5 out of 15. And then there are any preparation instructions also included in this. So this is an amazing tool for the coffee industry because we've never had anything like this, right? We've never had something to unify around as far as what flavors are in coffee and what their descriptions are. And we certainly have never had a way to calibrate on those descriptions. So I encourage you all to check out this document, dig into it, and then use it with the flavor wheel. You probably have seen this. The SCAA put out a new flavor wheel in January of this year in tandem with this sensory lexicon by World Coffee Research. And it's no coincidence that this wheel, the new wheel, is actually the SCAA/WCR flavor wheel, because we use the lexicon words to put around the wheel. Those are all words that have been identified in the lexicon by the trained panel at those universities as existing in coffee. And we did another study to figure out how to put them around the wheel, but that's for another talk. We're talking about flavor perception. So I want to bring up, this is the original wine wheel by Ann Noble. And what I found really interesting in this is that there are so many words that are the same between our coffee wheel and this wine wheel. Chemical, fruity, vegetative, caramel, woody, earthy, floral, spicy, like all of these things. You guys know it's all overlapping. And I found this over and over again when I was researching wheels. It's not just the wine wheel. And I know, depending on your opinion on this, we either love to compare wine to coffee or we hate to compare wine to coffee. But this isn't actually what this is about in the wine wheel. In fact, if you look at other wheels, like I said, a lot of the terms are also overlapping. And I started to realize that that's because our human perception is not as advanced as the flavors in the things that we are perceiving. And that means when you look at the wheel, we're going to share a lot of the words because these are the limits to human sensory perception, these words. And we're going to find them in almost everything because we, as instrumentation, are not that sensitive. The flavors that are in products like coffee or anything else that's a complex mixture of chemistry goes far beyond what we can sense. So that leads me to a lead into multisensory interactions, which is sort of like how we just can't separate our senses when we perceive coffee or any other product. It's an integrated experience. I think I'm already closing in on my time, so I'm going to go a little bit faster here. There are just some fun examples of how things influence our perception. There's been a bunch of research on colors and how they can trick us, they can fool us basically into perceiving things differently. Like reds are associated with sweetness, and black is associated with bitterness, and white, salty. Like, these are visual cues that are ingrained into our life. Brown is the color of things when they're spoiled, like rotting fruit, rotting bananas. Blue or clear things are sort of perceived as refreshing because they're like liquidy and watery, and that's refreshing. There are also some illusions, like visual tricks that our brain can play on us, and that's why I put the little arrow, the trick there, where those lines are actually the same length. You guys have probably already seen this, but because of the direction of the arrows, if you will, on the line, it tricks our brain into thinking that they're different lengths. And this concept can go all the way into when we eat or drink something. Color can influence what we perceive to be the value of a product. This is from a study done on wine, where the bottles were labeled with different colors. And what they found is that if the label was red, people were sort of more willing to pay a higher price for that wine. And what do you remember about red? It's associated with sweetness. Presentation, visual cues, delivery, a messy plate versus a neat plate, the plate material, the cup material, the spoon material. Which do you prefer? Raise your hand if you prefer the plate on the left. Okay, the right. That's pretty good. Usually as humans, for some reason, we gravitate towards symmetry. So in this case, this was a study done at the restaurant with a scientist, and they found that people gravitated more towards the plate on the right because it's more symmetrical. It's got that circle in it. Very simple, but demonstratable. This is a study with coffee out of different colors and styles of mug. And in this study, they found that in the white mug, the sort of big white normal diner looking mug, the coffee was perceived as more intense than in the glass mug. Latte art. A lot of you probably saw this study when it came out, but latte art also has been shown to affect people's value perception of a coffee. They also found in this study that the latte art was more likely to lead people to expect that they would like it more, but then not necessarily that they actually liked it more. So it was a little bit complicated there, but people expected to like it more at least. So also sound. We're going to talk a lot about sound later with Simon, so I'll just dash through this. But music and sound can help set expectations. It can complement or clash with an experience. And again, it depends on your demographic. It depends on your own personal experience with sound and music, what you like. There have been a bunch of studies on how sound affects flavor perception, including that sort of higher pitch, light notes are associated with more citric flavors versus the sort of woodwind or brass, or more associated with like a caffeine bitterness. And all of this, again, has to do with expectations. I think this expectation thing is really relevant to us in coffee because every customer that walks in your door has an expectation of what they're going to get. And what I've learned over the course of my study and reading on this topic is that if they get what they expect, they're going to enjoy the flavor more. And if they don't get what they expect, if they're expecting something different, even if that thing is great that they got, they're going to perceive it as not as good. That's a huge challenge for us. But look at this. Purple ketchup. That is just weird. We have a certain expectation of what products are. And this is a really easy example, but hey, a cup of coffee in a diner mug looks like a cup of coffee in a diner mug. It's our challenge to educate people to know the difference between those things and to expect something different when they go into your shop. So, oh my gosh, one more thing. We want to make sure we use all this fun stuff that's in front of you. So, this is a really exciting exercise where the juice, you're going to put the juice in your mouth and swish it around for like pretty much just 30 seconds or so. And then please spit it back in the cup. Okay, all the time. Oh. Great, thanks. So, do it now. I know it's not that great tasting, but it'll be okay. So swish it around your mouth. Keep going. Really gotta swish it around. Get it in there. And then when you think it's been like 30 seconds, which is not yet, by the way. Sam. Then you can spit it out of your cup.
Sam, did you swallow it?
So now, before you swig the water, you got some candy. So this candy will help you. So I want you to, it doesn't matter the order you go in your little cup of candy, but there are a few different types of candy.
Not these ones?
Oh, sorry. The cup with a lot of candy in it.
Good. Leave the jelly beans for the next talk.
Yeah, the cup without the jelly bean. So the cup with more candy in it. I saved this for last because I didn't want to sort of do this at the very beginning, but this is focusing on sweetness. I know we talk about sweetness so much in the coffee industry. It's something that we value and something that we're striving for in our coffee. And when I first did this exercise, I just thought it was so interesting because if you remove sweet from your palate, it's kind of like a whole new world. And I know we don't have coffee to taste right now, but so this solution that I gave you, basically it blocks your taste receptors for sweetness. And these different candies have different things in them, like one's a sour candy, one's actually a peanut. It's not really candy. Changes the way that you perceive what these things taste like in a huge way. So I just encourage you to try a couple different candies. But it only lasts for about 20 minutes, don't worry.
That was an evil laugh.
It's an herbal capsule that's actually sold to kind of help people control their blood sugar because if you just ingest it as a capsule, it suppresses your want and enjoyment of sweet things. It's called
Geneva Silvestre.
Thank you. Geneva Silvestre. Anyone who wants to email me about what that is exactly after this, you can. I have my email at the end of the talk. Sorry that it might have been a little bitter, but it will wear off shortly. So I've actually never tried this exercise with coffee, but I challenge all of you to do that because you can also get a sugar pack, like, you know, that you would add to your tea or something, and put the sugar right on your tongue. It's just like sand. It's like nothing's there. It's incredible. But I would imagine that this would help us understand sweetness in our coffee brew in a really interesting way. So I challenge all of you to check it out. So to close, it's complicated, right? The flavor perception experience is an all-encompassing one where you know what you want, you might not get it, you have certain taste palette, the coffee or the product that you're tasting might not fit into that, maybe it's something new, all of your senses. Think about walking into a new coffee shop that you've never been to before. It's an experience. It's the design, it's the music, it's the color of the wall, it's the taxidermy, you know, whatever it is. It's all playing into your experience, and if you feel comfortable and you get a coffee and you're expecting it to be great and it's great, that's a nice experience. It will influence your perception of the flavor. I wrote a couple articles about this multisensory interaction thing a couple of years ago, and they are still on the SCAA website, on the Chronicle magazine. So if you're interested in this, you can find them there. I also know that we have a couple of RICO symposium talks that are posted on the RICO YouTube channel on this topic. So those are all good resources if you're interested in learning more about this. Basically, the takeaway for me is it's complicated, so enjoy our complex mixture, right? I think that we are amazingly gifted to have such a complex product. Yes, it can be a challenge sometimes, but we can learn about it for ages and help our customers learn about it and appreciate it for ages, and no one will be out of a job. So we can just enjoy it. Thank you. Right, and this is my email, so feel free to be in touch about any sciencey question. That's what I'm here for.